Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Shaw, Alex Wolf. You guys knew we couldn't do a mailbag in only one part. I think it's literally never happened. So we are back with more of your questions. Alex, so what are we getting into today?
We're going to talk about Donovan Mitchell as a potential top option for the Knicks should he come over, and if his off nights could actually be kind of scary. We're going to talk about Derrick Rose and his future with the Knicks, and what's to come with him. And then we'll talk about a couple big names that might be available in free agency. It's kind of been assumed that they wouldn't, but who knows? So we'll talk about the viability of two big names in free agency this coming offseason next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. We wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We're now available on all platforms, including on YouTube. So if you're not seeing our beautiful smiling faces on a daily basis, I don't know what you're doing. You're missing out on half the experience. Please go check us out. We recently had the legend CP, the franchise of Knicks Fan TV, on to talk about some Julius Randle mock trades, to review Julius Randle's season. So if you missed that episode, specifically if you missed it on YouTube, because you're not getting the full CP experience over audio, you should go check that out. But I am Gavin Shaw, a play-by-play broadcaster. It's officially lacrosse season. So if you're a big lacrosse guy, we have some of the best lacrosse in the country here in New York. So go check that out on Varsity Media. He is Alex Wolf, editor-in-chief, a little bit more relevant of the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world, the Strickland. Check out all the writing on the Strickland. Check out the Strickland Podcast Network. They do great work as well. And once again, this is Locked On Knicks, and we're continuing with your questions. The first one, we talked about Donovan Mitchell a little bit in our first show. We are continuing the theme in this second show. The question comes from Mark at Far Off Mark, who I feel like always asks questions for these. So shout out to you, Mark. And he said, is it fair to say that Donovan Mitchell's bad shooting nights are worse than RJ's, even though his total efficiency is far better? Do we really want such a volatile first option to pair with our young core? I don't know, Alex, do we?
I mean, it doesn't bother me too much, if I'm being honest. I guess your hope would be if you're able to trade for Mitchell that you can hold on to RJ in that scenario. I imagine you're probably, unfortunately, having to part with quickly, maybe a couple of the other young guys, plus some picks, all that good stuff to make to make everything work. And then, salary, you need to include like Fournier and, whatever other guys. So, I mean, there would have to be, some of the current core going out, but ideally, I think you would want to pair him with RJ Barrett. And if you could manage to pull that off, I think that the belief there would be that their off nights would hopefully offset one another. And that, they would have the sort of humility to understand when one or the other doesn't have it any given night and, sort of defer to the other. And, Mitchell seems like he's got a pretty good handle on that. And I think that if he had another, top scoring option like an RJ Barrett that could, take that burden off of him, that he would defer to RJ on any given night. Just like I think if RJ was having kind of an off night, that he would defer to Mitchell. So I think that's my overall answer here. I mean, it doesn't bother me. I mean, you're talking about a dude that's like a 25. What is he averaging this year? 25.
He's at 26, 5 assists and 4 rebounds a game this year.
Yeah, I mean, he offers you a lot more than just scoring too. That's the other thing. Like, he's a 5 assist guy as a shooting guard. That's pretty good. So he's definitely moving the ball. He's definitely getting teammates involved and stuff like that. And I just think everybody has off nights, but as long as Mitchell has shown pretty consistently that he produces when you need him to produce. Like, he's been a really good playoff performer thus far in his career. And obviously in the bubble put up like that, like legendary series and everything else. So I think that he's definitely, like, nothing would scare me with him. Let's put it that way. It's not anything that would hold me back from trading for him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you're picking nits at that point, right? Because outside of Carmelo Anthony, the Knicks have not had a Donovan Mitchell type talent since Patrick Ewing. So that's like baseline to me. sort of wipes away any concerns. That guy's available even at a significant price. You go and get him, and you can't really. It's like sort of the same conversation that we have about Zion Williamson, where people are like, well, like the injury risk is significant, and like, yeah, it is. Like, yeah, like there's a little bit of a queasiness to paying him however many hundreds of millions of dollars, but you can't. You gotta take a risk at some point, right? You gotta bet on someone. And to me, Donovan Mitchell is very high on the list of potential guys the Knicks should be betting on. I think I understand where the question's coming from. I mean, one, he was coming off, I think, literally like his worst shooting game. What was he, 5 for 24 the other night? Like one of the worst shooting games of his career the other night. And I do think, unless you're talking about like a Chris Paul or Steve Nash, two guys who I think are up there and just flat out the most talented shooters of all time, if you're building your offense around a smaller guard, they're inevitably going to have off nights, right? Because they're just not near the basket all that often. I mean, and Mitchell is more so than a lot of these guys, but just the degree of difficulty that they're operating in when you're talking about someone who's 6'3" and the fulcrum of an offense, like that's hard to do. So I think it's sort of baked into the package. But Mitchell, such a talented shooter, and to the point on efficiency, this is the first year of his career who shot better than 43.5%. He's at 45% from the field, right around 35% from three. Like if that's your high volume guy scoring 26 points per game and brings you some stuff as a playmaker, count me in on that, dude. I think there are fair questions. I mean, the whole thing with him and Rudy Gobert is so weird. I mean, that just seems like kind of like a one-on-one dynamic. And I do worry that at points he kind of hijacks the offense. Like you'll see possessions where he just dribbles the air out of the ball for 15, 16 seconds and then takes a pull-up three. I think with the right teammates in the right system, he doesn't strike me as an inherently selfish player. I think he's someone who could move the ball and is exceptionally smart. And I think with the right team in the right context, he would do really well. And a lot of times Utah is that team and that context, and you see flashes of brilliance from him as a passer. So yeah, I have no doubts about Donovan Mitchell. But Alex, I don't know, do you have anything to add to that, or you want to wrap up the segment on another question?
Yeah, let's move to our second question. Although it's a good question, it's a fair one to ask, but I think ultimately, yeah, like you said, it's sort of picking nits at that point. Like there's nothing really to hold you back from trading for a Donovan Mitchell if that opportunity presents itself. But our next question comes from Rella1K at Rella1K on Twitter. At what point did you realize the Knicks weren't going to make the playoff or play in? November 17th was the day for me. It was all good 10 months ago. I'm going to say the real point for me, I mean, to say knowing that they weren't even going to make the play in, I mean, that's more extreme than saying the playoffs. Like I knew that they weren't going to meet our lofty expectations fairly early. The point that I felt pretty sure that they were not even going to necessarily make the play in, even as like the 10 seed, or that they'd have to like really work to sneak into that, was when we kept talking about that stretch, like right around the All-Star break, or like right around the 40 game mark, like the halfway point of the season, where it was like, all right, they're only like 500 right now, and they really needed to be better than 500. And the schedule coming up is really, really brutal. So there was like that one last stretch that led them through about game, I don't know, 50-ish. I forget exactly what teams it was that they were facing, but like they had that one stretch where it was like the last somewhat easy stretch of the season. And we were like, they basically need to like win out on this stretch, like before they hit this really hard stretch and have like a nice like 6-7 game cushion. When they came out of that stretch still at about 500, I kind of saw the writing on the wall. Like the schedule was going to get way harder. And then go figure, they did have that losing 17 out of 20 stretch. And that was sort of like the final nail in the coffin, I think. But that was about the time that I realized that the Knicks weren't going anywhere this year. But what about you, Gavin?
Yeah, I'd say the string of immediately after the 5-1 start, you knew things weren't right? Like Randall was just clearly not the same dude from an efficiency perspective. RJ was, I mean, it feels like a long time ago now, but he was playing terribly. And I think to me, that was almost the most painful part of the early season. It was like, I really expected this dude to make a leap, and he just didn't. And in retrospect, obviously he was dealing with some stomach issues apparently, and just dealing with the fact that Kemba Walker wanted the offense, Julius Randle wanted the offense, Evan Fournier was trying to find his rhythm, too many cooks in the kitchen. But at that point I was like, all right, this could go kind of bad. But the point I knew they weren't going to make the play-in, which just because it's so, all you have to do is be the 10 seed, like it's pretty easy to make the play-in, was when they started blowing 20-point leads, 3 out of 5 games. That was like, all right, this team is, it's just, no matter what, if Tibbs plays Alec Burks 70 minutes a game, it's probably not going to happen. So I wasn't betting on the Knicks at that point. But if you want to make a different kind of bet, you can go to BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championships, odds, podcasts, and reviews for all the different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And they also, because baseball season is getting started, they have MLB future odds. Alex, I'll toss this over to you. I know you love your Mets. Are you betting on them? Are you going crosstown and maybe betting on the Yankees, surprising some people, or a different team completely? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I definitely do not feel super confident about betting on the Mets right now. They're at a plus 200 to win the NL East. If you asked me 3 weeks ago, I would have said, buy, get it, bet that, hammer that one and do it. Now, Jacob deGrom out for a couple months, and Max Scherzer now apparently dealing with some sort of nebulous injury concerns. No, thank you. I'm not betting the Mets. The Mets are cursed. They are always cursed. They had their best offseason in probably like a decade, and I still can't bet them plus 200. So I don't know. I don't know how you feel about the Yankees, but I'm not betting the Mets, unfortunately. And I don't know who to bet because the NL East is always just topsy-turvy. So I have no idea who to bet there.
Yeah, I had no idea Max Scherzer was on the Mets, so I'm not going to give anyone any betting advice outside of I'm not a fan of the Yankees offseason, but head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet online where the game starts. And with that, we are back on Locked On Knicks. Let's keep it rolling on this mailbag. A question from my guy, Adrian Chatham. I want to say Adrian. Let me know if I'm getting your last name wrong. I referenced him before, but I met Adrian watching the new Batman movie. I was sitting right next to me, so that was pretty cool. Fantastic dude. Shout out to Adrian and shout out to him for this great question. He wants to know, with quickly developing and the team probably pursuing a point guard over the offseason, the elephant in the room is what happens to Derrick Rose. Seems everyone figures he'll want to go to a team in the playoff picture. What do you think will happen? Does he stay and fortify the second unit, or do we try to trade him? Alex, I think that's a great question. I'm kind of perplexed by it. What do the Knicks do with Derrick Rose?
I think basically what will happen with Rose is I feel pretty confident they'll keep him going into next season. I think he's really shown himself, regardless of the situation, to enjoy being sort of a mentor at this stage in his career. He seems to really relish his relationship with Quickly. He obviously has had a great effect on Obi Toppin, with helping unlock the best parts of Obi Toppin's game. I think the Knicks will look at that and they'll say, especially if they're giving Tibbs a vote of confidence to come back another year. I mean, Rose has made it pretty clear that he loves Tibbs. Tibbs loves Rose as well. Also, Rose is like one of the only veteran players who Tibbs has sort of been respectful to in terms of like minutes load and stuff. Even when Kemba was playing, it was like Tibbs didn't really have any concerns for Kemba's like knees or whatever any given night. He would play him however many minutes it took. But Rose was pretty consistently outside of like last year's like playoffs and like right down the stretch of last year's season. This year he was pretty consistently only playing him like a max of like 20 to 25 minutes to preserve his knees and everything. And in the case of this year's ankle, which still went bad anyway at a certain point. But I think that's, I think as long as the Knicks are keeping Tibbs, and then let's say if the Knicks underwhelm to start next year, Tibbs gets fired before the trade deadline or something, then I would entertain, if Rose is having a good season, I would entertain trading him. But I think that Rose would be okay. I actually don't think that Rose will care too much about playing for a contender or whatever. It just doesn't seem that important to him. I feel like comfort is more important to him. And like Tibbs is his comfort zone as a coach. He seems to really like his teammates and stuff. I think he'd be okay just sticking around. Obviously, if he asked for a trade, I'd honor it. But I think he'd be okay sticking around. I think the Knicks will be more than okay keeping him around for now because he's a good veteran that's, very friendly with the young players. I think he ends up sticking with the Knicks, at least through the start of next year. I don't think he gets moved in the offseason. Only way I see him getting moved is if he has like, if the Knicks get real value for him at the trade deadline next year and aren't really going anywhere, and especially if they don't have Tibbs anymore, then I can maybe see him being moved by then. But even that I wouldn't call a sure thing.
Yeah, Alex, I'm of two minds of it, right? Look, Derrick Rose is 33 years old at this point. He just missed essentially a full season of basketball. He's had a million different injuries. And we know with him, like if he loses just a little bit more of that signature explosiveness, like all of a sudden you can go from a guy who was a hyper efficient player for the Knicks the last season and a quarter to one who struggles to score the basketball. And at that point, even with the veteran leadership he has, even with like everything he brings off the court, I'd question if he's a rotation piece for the Knicks when you want to prioritize Emmanuel quickly, when you want to prioritize Deuce McBride. The flip side of that is the Knicks bench unit picked off or continued off essentially where they left off last season as the best group in the league to start this season. If we remember, the starters that we were so hyped about were one of the worst lineups in the NBA, and the Knicks bench unit, when Derrick Rose was playing, was basically the best lineup in all of basketball. So it's clear that, again, if there's not some significant drop-off, and that's a mystery that none of us can answer until we see him on the court again, he can really, really, really impact winning. And I think the year that Emmanuel quickly got to find his own game and to improve his confidence, and Obi Toppin developing so much more diversity to his offensive attack, those guys playing together, I mean, it could be dynamite a year from now, and just even harder to stop than it already was. We know there's just such a high chemistry level. We know Rose makes life so much easier for those two. So for that reason alone, I think I'd lean towards keeping Rose. And I think to your point, as long as Tom Thibodeau is here, Derrick Rose will be here. And it's not much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think we could probably move to our next question here. This comes from RJ Barrett Defense Brigade at Barrett Brigade 9. Thoughts on Dyson Daniels as a potential draft prospect? And I don't know if to say he will probably be in the Knicks range or will he probably be in the Knicks range, but either way, Gavin, my thoughts on him, just briefly. I mean, I've only done a little bit of research into Daniels so far. He's playing for the G League Ignite. He's from Australia. I don't know what it is about Australia and producing like super huge guards that do all the things that I like, but he seems like a very Alex type prospect, just like Josh Giddey was last year. So I'm very intrigued by him, and I'm starting to do a little more homework on him. Whether he'll be in the Knicks range is an interesting question because suddenly lately I've been seeing him fly up draft boards. I mean, he's gone from a probable late lottery to potentially end of first round guy that I was seeing in mocks to now suddenly really leaping up. I guess now that people are sort of putting two and two together, like, oh, like tall guard with really good guard skills. That's like he's like 6'8", I think. He's very tall. Yeah. So guys like that are very valuable in today's NBA, as we've seen with guys like LaMelo Ball, Josh Giddey, that sort of thing. So I'm about it. I think you've done a little more looking into him than I have at this point, but based off the small amount of research that I've done, he's very much, as our friend Prez would say, with Prez bait, he's very much Alex bait. He's a guy that profiles as a type prospect that I would love to add pretty much anytime. So I'm about it if he's available in the Knicks range, but that's a question because he might have a meteoric rise like Josh Giddey did last year, where he went from being mocked in that same range, that like mid first round-ish wasteland, to all of a sudden hopping up to the number 6 pick in the draft. You might see the same thing happen with Daniels this year. But if he's available in the Knicks range, he's definitely a guy I'd be looking at potentially drafting.
Yeah, my gut instinct is he's not going to be available in the next pick. And if the Knicks, because the Knicks are right, they're either at 12th, 13th, 14th, 4, 3, 2, 1. If the Knicks jump up, they're going to be taking one of like Ivy, Banchero, Holmgren, and Jabari Smith, right? Like, and if they stay, I have a feeling he ends up going between 5 and 10. Like, to your point, he's just too dynamic at that size. It seems like the jumper is coming along a little bit. I think he just had like a massive triple-double the other week. He just seems like a dude to me that is only going to go up in terms of the draft process. Like, maybe he's some poor shooting workouts and maybe that makes people question things. But I have a feeling he's the type of guy like the Knicks are going to have to like throw in a Deuce McBride to move up 5 spots if they want to go and get him. And that would take the right team and the right situation. But I would be super duper intrigued by his fit in New York. It's similar to what I referenced in the last mailbag. Obviously, he doesn't have this reputation as a defender yet, but almost analogous to getting someone like Jonathan Isaac, where if you just want to build this horde of big wings around RJ and you want to play Grimes, Reddish, whether it's a Daniels, whether it's an Isaac, whether it ends up being obviously Obi Toppin's in a different category, but I love the idea of that kind of lineup. I think that's the direction of where the NBA is going. And Daniels gives you the added benefit of having a little extra playmaking juice. And I love the idea of him, RJ, and Quickly all on the floor at the same time. I think that would be really scary, really interesting. And this Knicks team that has already shown flashes of just very cohesive, like group playmaking, like almost, I hesitate to say it, but almost Spurs-esque. And on a team that doesn't have a lot of athleticism, I think you almost need that to compensate to some extent. I love his fit in New York. I just have a feeling he's not going to be there when the Knicks pick.
Yeah, I'm with you, Gavin. It just reads like the Giddey situation all over again to me. I had myself talked into Giddey potentially being available for the Knicks last year. At like the 20th pick or whatever the Knicks had, 18th, whatever it was, prior to all the movement and everything, and it just never happened. He just rose too fast because that archetype of player, a guy who's that tall that can do that many things with the ball, and has, as you said, some playmaking to him as well. Just he's not going to fall very far. He's going to shoot up boards as soon as he starts getting in workouts and stuff. If he's shooting well, in workouts, and if he crushes it in like some scrimmages and stuff, like forget about it. And his measurements too are going to come out great if he does the combine. So he's going to be too high for the Knicks. But we can move to our next question here, I think. And this comes from Jake Andrews at NY Critics on Twitter. And Jake wants to know, I know it's all trades and draft now, but I want to skip ahead to free agency. Do you think there's a shot at either Zach LaVine or Bradley Beal getting free, and could the Knicks make a run at them? Interested in Malik Monk if you can get him on a fair contract? What exactly is the Knicks cap situation? So I guess I can preface everything with the cap situation. I don't have the numbers like directly in front of me. More or less, the Knicks don't profile to have much, if any, cap space, but I think their avenues to getting cap space are pretty easy. The cap is going to go up a little bit this year. It's like by a handful of millions of dollars. So that will help a little bit. That'll give, a little bit of spending flex there. They'll find a way to get rid of Kemba Walker, even if they have to attach a second-round pick to him or something. They'll send him somewhere as an expiring contract. Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel are both expiring contracts as well because they're final-year player options. Evan Fournier, I think, would be somewhat easy to move if you really had to. But the reality is that the Knicks would probably be looking at a sign and trade scenario of some sort. And my guess would be that, let's say that Beal or LaVine says, like we've seen happen in recent years, like let's say like Kyle Lowry with the Miami Heat, they didn't have the space to sign him outright. So they work out a sign and trade because Lowry just said, I only want to go to the Heat, and they accommodated him. If LaVine or Beal would say, I only want to go to the Knicks could then say, well, we can pay our big treasure trove of second-round picks to clear up the space if we have to, Washington or Chicago. But if you want, instead, we can just send those guys your way, like the Evan Fournier, Alec Burks, whoever it is that kind of fits their fancy, plus a couple of second-round picks or whatever to grease the wheels of this sign and trade, rather than us just sending those guys elsewhere with picks attached to them and you guys not getting anything out of the transaction. And I think that those teams would be accommodating. So that's sort of the cap situation there. But Gavin, I'll throw it to you as far as the how you feel about LaVine and Beal, and then also Malik Monk, who I think we've both sort of said that we're kind of fans of in the past. But yeah, what do you think about those three names?
Yeah, Beal, has really telegraphed his intention to re-sign in Washington, and over the years, seemingly, has never come in and demanded a trade, despite the Wizards' incompetency. It seems like he just loves living in that city. He loves being the face of that franchise. Wants to be sort of like a one-team guy for his career, which you can certainly respect. I'm sure the fact that the Wizards can pay him more than anyone else comes into it. Though, again, in a sign and trade scenario, he could, unless I'm mistaken, he can get that max extension and then still go to another team. But I would assume that Beal is going to stay in Washington. LaVine seems overwhelmingly likely to stay in Chicago, given all the improvements that they've made. I'm still a believer that team, if Lonzo Ball hadn't gotten hurt and they haven't had all the injuries this year, they would be up there with maybe still a notch below the Milwaukees and the Miamis, but pretty much up there with anyone in the East. I bought into them. I think they were really, really, really good. And I think Lonzo getting hurt kind of killed their season to some extent. But I think LaVine sees the vision there and sees that team is on an upward trajectory. The LaVine's just the kind of guy you sell the farm for, right? Like a hyper efficient 27, 28 point per game scorer. I think people around the league underrate his shooting talent to some extent, that even if the athleticism declines a bit over the next couple of years, like he's someone I would invest in and not think twice about it. I would honestly feel better about investing in LaVine than Beal at this point, which is shocking for me to say because I've always been a big Bradley Beal guy, but I just don't see either of those guys being available. And even if they are, I don't know if the Knicks want to push in like all their assets for either of them. And like either of those teams would, it would be interesting in a sign and trade scenario whether they'd have interest in Julius Randle, because obviously that's the contract. If you're the Knicks, that would make the most sense in that kind of deal versus something else. But Monk, I love, always been a huge fan of his game. I just kind of question like him and Quickly together in the backcourt is a little bit small. Quickly's length like gives you a little bit of an offsetting factor there. And if you're the Knicks and you have all these big wings that you can play around those guys, maybe it would work out. I wouldn't mind the Knicks taking a flyer on him. But I think as long as Evan Fournier is still on the team, if Alec Burks is on the team, there's just too much of a glut at shooting guard to fit Malik Monk in there.
Yeah, I'm sort of with you on all three counts. I'll just say on LaVine, like I agree, he's the guy that out of those two, if let's say just in theory both would become available, I would definitely go for LaVine over Beal. I just think I don't know what it is. I feel like his game's going to age better for some reason. Like you said, even if the athleticism tapers off some, something about LaVine's game, just I feel like he's going to be better long term and would be a better long term investment. That said, like I mean, I wouldn't say no to Beal if he became available either as a free agent like that. I do think it's just likely that both of them, just take the money though. I mean, I think it would be more defensible if Beal were to leave, Washington, because they've been trapped in just mediocrity or being outright bad for so long. And granted, like his health hasn't exactly helped that along. He's gotten hurt a number of times, and that's sort of derailed things for them. And so did John Wall for years. John Wall got hurt so many times and all that stuff that just kind of killed whatever good thing they had going there. But like, I think if LaVine was willing to leave the Bulls that quickly, I would almost have some character concerns with him at that point. I'd be like, how impatient is he? Like that, this is the first time that the Bulls have made the playoffs, I think, since he's been there. And, so that happens, and they had this sort of resurgence, and like DeRozan was so good this year for them, and Vucevic has been good. I don't know. I just, I sort of I would question his motivations then, leaving that team so quickly. As far as Monk, I'm sort of with you too. They would have to move one or both of like Burks and Fournier to make that work. But I do like his game. I think he's been one of the only bright spots on the Lakers this year, who just got eliminated from playoff and play-in contention just last night, and might lose 50 games this year, which is insane. But I think that he's. I think he would be a good option, but he's probably going to be looking for somewhat of a payday after putting up so good of a year this year, and also taking a big discount to go to the Lakers this year too. So, I wouldn't want to give him a big payday and then have him have to compete with Alec Burks and Evan Fournier for minutes. And maybe you work out some sort of sign and trade deal where you essentially just swap him in for Burks. That might be something that I'm interested in. If the Lakers are interested in getting Burks back and Monk says, like, I don't want to come back to this team next year, then maybe they'd be interested in doing that. But I like all three names. I just don't know how likely it is, especially for the 2-star guys, to potentially become available to the Knicks. But Gavin, we'll move to our final question here of this April mailbag. This comes from Jay Harp at Starpula on Twitter. Here's a question that's too dumb to make your show, but I've been dying to send to someone. Well, joke's on you, Jay Harp. We're running it, man. We're answering the question. How about keeping Kemba and treating him like a starting pitcher in baseball? He plays 30 minutes every 7 to 10 days and rests his knees in between. He can go balls out in those 20 games he plays and keep the knee fresh each game. Every time he would come back, like he was great at the start and then slowed down. This is brilliant. In theory, in a vacuum, I don't disagree with this idea, Gavin, that you could have Kemba play take load management to a whole new level in basketball. And essentially, let's even say that they made it play 2 games and then sit 3 or something like that the whole season. Maybe it could work. However, I think from a realistic perspective, things are just too far gone with Kemba. Like he's not going to come back to the Knicks no matter what. I think it's my basic read on that situation at this point.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe they could have done it this season, but now the situation's untenable. But even then, I don't fully realistic answer. I think Jay Harp was acknowledging this in the question. I just don't think that's feasible in basketball because guys need. I mean, we're seeing with Obi Toppin now. Guys need consistent minutes. They need to get into a rhythm. They need consistent roles. If not, you're just gonna have a constantly uneasy locker room. If it's RJ's offense and Quickly's offense for 3 out of 5 games and 2 out of 5 games, Kemba's all right, well, I'm Kemba, and I'm fully healthy. I'm the number one guy now. And it would almost work better with I don't know, the equivalent of a 36, 37-year-old Ray Allen, just a pure shooter who you're bringing in a smaller role and say, hey, you can only play every 2 to 5 games. You can only play 15, 20 minutes, but at least it's someone who doesn't have all these cascading effects down the rotation. I don't think it would really work, but I think we all knew that going into the question. So yep, that's all I got.
All right. Well, this has been our April mailbag. So thanks to everybody that submitted questions. As usual, we got enough questions. We had to go 2 parts. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back with more pods. I think, Gavin, we're full disclosure.
Final game of the season, I think.
Yeah, we're recording this on Wednesday, but
or 2 more games. Sorry, 2 more games.
Yeah, 2 more games left of the season for next week. So we'll be back next week with our final game recaps of the season, and then stick around with us because it's actually going to get a lot more fun once we get to stop covering games all the time. So thank you all for rocking with us this season. I'm sure we'll be giving out more thanks next week as well. But we'll be back next week. Talk to you guys all soon. Peace out.